Okay, so episode 8, the finale of season 3 of The Mandalorian is finally here, and we need to break it down, so let's get straight into it. We begin the episode with Bo Katan and the other Mandalorians racing to find an exit, and Bo Katan makes contact with Axe Woves, giving him orders as he flies to the fleet. The communication cuts out as Axe reaches the atmosphere due to the magnetic interference, and notice that as the Mandalorians head out, Grogu is suspiciously not around. And we see why later. Mando attempts to escape, but things don't go so swimmingly until Grogu shows up. A concerned Grogu starts spraying Din with a bacta spray, and this is reminiscent of season 1 when IG-11 was helping Mando after he suffered damage from an explosion. So a nice little callback here. Mando makes contact with Bo, letting her know that he is going after Moff Gideon, and the Mandalorian survivor leads the rest of them to a safe haven. The Imperial fighters launch and Moff Gideon monitors Mando and Grogu's position, both of which are also color-coded, with Grogu highlighted in green. Mando makes contact with R5, who actually did travel with the scouting party in the previous episode. I actually completely missed him in episode 7, so I was initially quite surprised when he was already on the surface. But true enough, he did land with the scouting party. R5 drops into the base and begins to search for Moff Gideon's command center, which really reminded me of R2 helping out Luke and the rest search for Princess Leia on the Death Star. The Mandalorians evacuate, but Axe decides to stay behind to sell the decoy. And watching the Mandalorians fly onto dropships using their jetpack was some serious dropception moment. I mean, if you think about it, it's a bunch of Mandalorians dropping onto dropships set to drop them down below. Anyways, the Imperials arrive and decimate the light cruiser. Mando sneaks about and R5 manages to lower the barrier shield sequentially. And this entire scene had some really top-notch choreography, and the same goes for Mando's attempt to escape earlier. Mando tries to reach for the trooper's gun, but just misses it by a hair, which is a cool little detail that raises the tension. And it's really interesting to see how as Mando progresses, the weapons he uses progressively get more and more advanced. It was sort of like progressing through the levels of a video game. R5 is momentarily interrupted by a mouse droid, which were used mostly as communication and delivery droids, probably the most common Imperial droid out there. The mouse droid returns with more friends, and it's a rather comical moment as mouse droids are typically quite afraid, but I guess they're braver in numbers. Mando and Grogu end up in Moff Gideon's cloning facility, and they realize to their horror that Moff Gideon was cloning himself. Mando destroys the facility and the other Mandalorians arrive at the safe haven. And we learn that there is wildlife growing in small spots. We also learn that these were plants indigenous to Mandalore, something which was previously thought to be extinct. And this is indeed true, as even prior to the purge of Mandalore, the planet was already on the verge of death. Constant warfare throughout Mandalorian history had effectively turned the surface of the planet into a wasteland, an environment which we saw plenty of times during the Clone Wars and Rebels. The captain of the Mandalorian survivor mentions that the plants were dormant since before the century of civil war, likely referring to the Great Clan Wars where the new pacifist Mandalorians fought against the old Mandalorians for control of the planet, a war which allowed Duchess Satine to take power. Bo is informed by the armor that reinforcements have arrived, and it's really a glorious sight watching the Mandalorians descend on the Imperial base. And the ensuing jetpack dogfight is probably the coolest part of the episode, and this would be the first ever live-action jetpack dogfight, so really cool stuff. Mando and Grogu enter the command center, which is also where the Shadow Council meeting took place back in episode 7. Moff Gideon shows up and is pissed about the destruction of his clones, and we learn that what he was trying to do was to incorporate the Force into his clones, which coupled with Beskar's suits would really have been unstoppable. However, creating Force-sensitive clones is a very difficult, almost impossible mission. In fact, in Legends, numerous people have tried and failed to clone Jedi or Sith, simply because it's so hard to replicate midi-chlorians. In fact, even those who do manage to clone Force-sensitives, the clones always have something wrong with them. The clone Jorah Sabaoth is one such example, a Force-sensitive clone who ended up going mad. But this also means that Moff Gideon wasn't conducting the cloning experiments for the Emperor, and he wasn't directly trying to help revive Palpatine, which is an interesting diversion from what I think most people had originally assumed. But I also find it hard to believe that it was merely a coincidence that Moff Gideon was basically trying to do what Palpatine is also trying to do. So who knows, there may still be more to this story. Mando and Moff Gideon face off and the Praetorian Guards show up as well, but Grogu shows up, which ends up leading the Praetorian Guards away. The armor zips around with her hammer looking like a Mandalorian version of Thor, and we even see Casca Reeves use knee rockets. Knee rockets were of course part of the original arsenal for Boba Fett, and although never shown in action in the movies, it was shown for the first time back in Season 2. And the dogfight between the Mandalorians and the Imperials is pretty interesting because it also shows just how much more superior the Mandalorians are at this sort of aerial combat. Whereas the Mandalorians dominated but still faced resistance in a straight blaster fight with the Imperial Super Commandos, the moment the jetpacks are on, it's a whole other game. And it would make a lot of sense that the Imperials would be completely outmatched, as most of these Mandalorians have probably been trained at it since they were children. We also see Bo Katan just gut one of the troopers from behind with a darksaber, and if you pay close attention, it looks like the blade passes right through, which is a little weird since Beskar is supposed to be resistant towards the blade. I mean, we saw Mando face off against Moff Gideon and he used a Beskar spear and armor to fight him off. So if the Imperial Super Commandos were indeed wearing Beskar, it really shouldn't have gone through. Unless of course the Beskar used by the Imperial Commandos were of lower quality, potentially mixed in with other alloys which would allow something as strong as the Darksaber to cut right through. And this certainly is a possibility. With how expensive and rare Beskar is, I wouldn't be surprised if the Empire decided to cut costs by mixing it with other alloys. Bo Katan saves Mando, allowing Mando to save Grogu. It's also interesting to note that when Bo faces off against Gideon, it's pretty clear that she is the better fighter. And if it weren't for Moff Gideon's armor, he'd probably be dead pretty quickly. Mando faces off against the Praetorian Guards, but things only start to work out when Grogu and Mando start to work together. And it's a very unique way of fighting with Grogu using the Force. And Mando even stabs one of the Praetorians in the throat, which is probably as brutal as the show gets. And there's even a John Wick-esque moment where he shoots the foot to bring the guard head level before popping him off. Axe Woves steers a falling light cruiser down into the Imperial base. Moff Gideon destroys the Darksaber, which is an interesting development, but one that I'll save for another video. The light cruiser crashes into the base and we see the three of them tag team Gideon before the flames consume all of them. But Grogu manages to use the Force to create a shield around them, which is very reminiscent of the Season 1 finale, when he uses the Force to stop the flames of the Flame Trooper. But unlike the seasons before, the scale of it is much bigger and Grogu's ability has definitely continued to grow, as this time he doesn't even pass out. The armor performs the ceremony that was first shown back in episode 1, and this is probably the completion of that same ceremony which was interrupted by the crocodile. And the poor kid must be going through some things, as he did just lose his dad Paz Vizsla. Mando asks the armor to anoint Grogu as an apprentice, but he points out that he can't speak and therefore cannot take the oath. Mando asks if his parents gave permission, would it then be possible, to which the armorer says yes, leading Mando to formally adopt Grogu as his own. And this really brings the whole story back full circle, with the two of them now formally accepting each other, and a reflection on the ways both characters have grown through the last 3 seasons. The armorer tells Din that he needs to leave with Grogu to teach him the Mandalorian way, basically letting us know that the adventure for the two of them is far from over. Grogu looks down at the living waters, and we are then reminded that the mythosaur still lives below. The Great Forge is revived, symbolizing the revival of the Mandalorian civilization, and it's a pretty great moment. Mando and Grogu head to Adolphi base where they meet with Carson Teva, and in the background we can see Dave Filoni, Deborah Chow, and Rick Famuyiwa, who is also the director of this episode. Grogu looks up and we can see a Scout Trooper helmet, a TIE Fighter helmet, a Stormtrooper helmet that looks very similar to the ones we saw in Tatooine back in Season 1, and next to it the head of another IG droid. And this is definitely not IG-11, but it could be the head of IG-88, the bounty hunter droid first introduced in Empire Strikes Back, or it could be just another random IG unit. Mando offers himself to be an unofficial contract worker for the New Republic, and in return, Mando wants credits and the IG unit's head. Mando returns to Navarro where he is given the keys to his new house, and we are then introduced to the new IG-11, now the Marshal of Navarro. We cut to Mando and Grogu's new homestead, and is definitely there to evoke the same feeling as Luke's homestead on Tatooine. Grogu uses the Force to abuse a frog, much like what he did back in the book of Boba Fett during his time training with Luke Skywalker. And so that's all for the breakdown for the finale. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I'm the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.